Are we supposed to put our...
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
We're live now.
So can I start?
Yes.
Okay, dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to our webinar today titled Digital Technologies for Disaster Risk Management. These days, you are probably flooded with many webinars. Thank you for choosing our webinar today. And I hope this is not only useful, but also give you a chance to explore a future cooperation with us. My name is Ki-young Ko, Director of APC-ICT, Asia Pacific Training Center for ICT for Development, the organizer today. We are a specialized ICT capacity building institution under UNISDR. This is the virtual launch of our center's training module on ICT for DRM that provides an overview of how ICTs can be used for disaster risk management. And we are now ready to roll out our training to our potential audience in developing countries. And we welcome partners who can work with us. We normally provide face-to-face training workshops, but due to COVID-19, as you know, this year we turned everything virtually. Before we start, I'd like to briefly introduce our center and what we do for you to explore future cooperation with us. Okay. Asia Pacific Training Center for ICT for Development. Our mandate is to build human and institutional ICT capacity for UNESCAP member states. And in order to achieve our mandate, we do three major activities. First, of course, capacity building. Second, we provide technical assistance. Number three, we provide e-learning and knowledge sharing platform. For capacity building program, we have specific target groups. First group is policymakers and civil service. The second group is women entrepreneurs and related stakeholders. The third group is young leaders. For each specific target group, we have a program, specialized program. For policymakers and civil service, we call Academy. And this program is well used by many member countries. And some countries officially adopted, integrated our program into their senior officer program. For women entrepreneurs, we call Women ICT Frontier Initiative, Wi-Fi for short, and is gaining more popularity and being used in 8 countries. For young leaders, we call Primer Series. For Academy, targeting policymakers and civil servants, we have 4 theme categories. Under introductory, we have the 3 courses. Under digital government and transformation, we have 4 courses. For digital society inclusion, we have 5 courses. What you're about to hear is a disaster risk management course, and it is under a borderless category. And ICT for COVID-19 is coming up in next month. We could outreach 40 developed countries in Asia Pacific region, but we could reach about 152 countries with our e-learnings. We provide regional, sub-regional, national workshops, training, of course, e-learning courses on every course we have. This is our website. You can download our training material and get access to our e-learning courses. Thank you. And if you want to find out more, please visit our website. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Mansoor Harizaka, Director of Geomatics Center in Asian Institute of Technology based in Bangkok. Okay, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ko. It's my pleasure to moderate this very important event, and I will like to welcome all these speakers, panelists, and the participants for this webinar. And first of all, before I'll introduce the presenter, I'll be there first presenting first part of this webinar. Then I will second part will be presented by our Professor Kees Van Westen. So Professor Kees Van Westen has a PhD degree in engineering geology from Technical University of Delft. In 1993, he completed. Currently, he is working as a full professor in ITC, University of Twente in the Netherlands. And he was also director of United Nations University's ITC Center for Geoinformation for Disaster Risk Management. And other panelists I will introduce in detail later. First is Mr. Kamal Kishore. He is member of National Disaster Management Authority. Mr. Francis Gasker, he is World Bank. He was former head of the UNDRR. Sarah Wade APCICT, he is program officer in UNDRR in Korea. So I'll now go to my first part of the presentation today, and I will like to share my screen as well. Yes. Okay. Can you see my? Okay. So the for this particular overview of the Academy module on ICT for disaster risk management, and I am currently Director of Geoinformation Center at Asian Institute of Technology, as Mr. Ko mentioned. And I was mainly responsible for developing this module in coordination with Professor Kees Van Westen, and also a lot of support from APC-ICT team and to make it possible. And there was also a big reviewer group also. They also contributed a lot to make this particular module successful. So our institute, this Asian Institute of Technology, which is a graduate institution focusing on engineering and environmental management industry studies, it ranked 19 in the world for the SDG goal 1, no poverty. We have 30 academic programs and nearly 23,000 alumni from 101 countries. And ITC, where Professor Kees comes from, its aim is to develop capacity, particularly in less developed countries, and to utilize geospatial solutions to deal with national and global problems. It has a large alumni network, much more than AIT, I think, because they are also Africa, South America, Pacific Island, or Asia, every continent they have. They have MSc, PhD, and online courses, and they also work in development related, mostly all aspects of development using remote sensing GIS technology. So this is very unique in that sense, this university is. So motivation for developing the module. As you know, according to the IPCC, disaster caused by hydrometeorological hazards are on rise, which constitute major portion of annual disaster events globally. If you look at Asia, probably around 80% of the disaster is caused by hydrometeorological origin. Data shows that economic damage is also on the rise due to rapid economic growth last 20 to 30 years in all the countries. So exposure of this economic asset has been increased to a great extent and causing this massive damage every year. Disaster risk management is a key for achieving sustainable social and economic development, because whatever you economic asset or you develop, one disaster comes and within maybe a few seconds or within a day, everything is completely damaged and completely gone. So this is very, very important from that point of view. And advances in information and communication technologies offer tremendous potential in DRM, which is the ability to collect, analyze, and share data and information instantly. So this is becoming more true as the technology is moving towards 5G, as you know, and 5G network, mobile network, which is, I think, one of the very big development, upcoming development in the communication sector, which will change the whole world. I think we must take the advantage of these new opportunities being created by ICT to handle or address the problem in disaster risk management. So objective and audience. This objective is to introduce the basic concepts of DRM and the applications of ICTs in disaster mitigation, prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. Target audience, mostly we policymakers and civil servants at national and local level who are responsible for in disaster management activities in their country or in local government. So while there are a lot of effort has gone to develop this module, so last year, exactly 1 year ago, 26th of August 2019, we had a meeting for expert group where I think around 30 experts came from academia, government agencies, UN organization to participate in this particular workshop, and where this main objective was to solicit comments, feedbacks on the draft version of the module to ensure quality and relevance to the target audience. We got enormous feedbacks, very good one, to which give us a solid foundation of this course from all these experts, and I would like to thank all of them who has contributed to make this module, bring this module to this level. And you can see in the photographs, different, all the left side, all the participants, and also some discussions going on during this meeting. Okay, so now I'll go to the module overview. One of the important structure of this module, we try to make this module in disaster management cycle because there are not so much material available ICT putting in disaster management cycle is here and there loosely linked. So one of the idea from Mr. Ko, I must thank him because this is initially we were a little bit reluctant, but he really pursued us to do this, and I think it has come out very well because of his advice or persistence. I would like to thank him for this. So first is the introduction to disaster risk management. Then participant can get familiar with DRM and associated terminologies, including linkage between Sendai framework and SDC. We both were adopted in 2015. And these terminologies, we are using the UNDRR latest terminologies. So as far as terminologies are concerned, this module is very up to date. Chapter 2, necessary data for risk management. Participants will be able to identify data necessary for disaster risk management, such as remote sensing data, digital elevation data, thematic data, historical data, and so on. third chapter is risk assessment and risk visualization. So many of you know that after this Sendai framework, risk assessment has come into limelight. So it was felt that without proper risk assessment, no risk reduction or risk management measures will not be sustainable or effective or efficient. So risk assessment is a very, very important component of any disaster management. So that's why one chapter is completely dedicated on risk assessment, and participant will appreciate the ways in which ICT can be used for disaster risk assessment, analysis, visualization, and know the basic steps of conducting risk assessment. And I'd also like to acknowledge that Professor Kees Van Westen contributed a lot. He's one of the authority on multi-hazard risk assessment globally, and he has really contributed a lot to this particular chapter, and he will explain more in his presentation after this. Then we come to the disaster management cycle, where you can see mitigation and prevention, understanding how information can be used for selecting appropriate disaster risk mitigation prevention measures at various levels, regional, national, local, and for making decisions by considering future risk scenarios. So as you know, risk is changing because of many factors. It could be population increase, economic, better economies, as well as climate change, many things. So how risk will be changed over next 20 years or 50 years. So this was somehow I explained in that the figure left side. So, and if you have proper risk reduction measures, you can reduce the risk to a great extent. So some case studies there, maybe Dr. Professor Kees will take up on that. Okay, so next is disaster preparedness, and ICT really help in disaster preparedness in many ways. ICTs can be used for the community-based preparedness planning, alerting, evacuating, shelter planning, establishing early warning system, and impact-based forecasting. All these topics are covered in this module, and you can see the right-hand side. We have developed this kind of system under one ADB project in 4 countries: Armenia, Bangladesh, Philippines, and Fiji. It was a very successful project, and we use mobile phone applications, remote sensing data for risk management in those countries. Chapter 6, ICT for disaster response and relief. So participant will be knowing the freely available satellite-based resources and products for emergency mapping, mobile application for reporting disaster incidents which are isolated disaster incident. They can from remote location they can also report. And also we covered some robot search and rescue operation in the module. And the image you can see in the left side, it was a Palu earthquake in 2018 where liquefaction happened, and a large area of the buildings where area become muddy and all the buildings were damaged and or swept away for several hundred meters. And chapter 7, ICT for disaster recovery. Person will know the ways in which ICT can be used to support disaster recovery, including post-disaster building damage assessment and post-disaster recovery planning. And right side, you can see this figure where Chengdu earthquake, how recovery has been picked up from slowly, and finally they come up to the almost original before the earthquake situation after a few years. So then the last chapter is the role of ICT in addressing issues related to gender and DRM. And this chapter is very important, but it may not be perfectly fitting this our traditional risk management, disaster risk management approaches. But I think gender is important in the sense, if you don't consider gender in risk assessment, it will be half done. And particularly if you look at a lot of reports, World Bank or UN, you will find that in most of the major disaster, number of women killed is almost double of the male counterpart. So there is a necessity to strengthen this women, or I would say empowering the women for this effective disaster risk management. We believe that ICT can play a great role in this, and that's why this chapter is added, and you can see some of these examples or some of these backgrounds given in this chapter. So we also included some policy considerations because our subject is by nature is a technical subject, disaster risk and management. And so whatever you do technically may be very good, but if there is policy part is not there, then it will be very, very difficult for the audience or for the government or for the policymakers or leaders to adapt into their work program. So that's why we have also put every chapters like risk assessment and visualization. So communicating the risk with the community at risk, increasing ICT accessibility, advancing information of accessibility. Similarly, mitigation and prevention, incorporate ICT for DRM as a part of sustainable development efforts, provide enabling policy environment, promote risk-informed policies and investment. Chapter 3, preparedness, unlocking the potential of regional cooperation, which is very, very, very important because disaster has no boundary. It can be coming from across the boundary. Capitalization of new technologies. As I said, maybe 5G is coming that we have to take advantage of it. Strengthen early warning system, encouraging standardization. So this is also very, very important so that, for example, CAP, Common Alerting Protocol, is the international standard. So if it is adopted in a country, then a tsunami warning coming from Pacific Disaster Center can be easily integrated to the, if they have the CAP, to their own early warning system. So their seamless communication is possible. So this is very important. Chapter 4, response and relief, improving communication and ICT infrastructure. Engage network operators in disaster response, particularly mobile network operators, because they are the they have a lot of subscriber around the country, even remote areas. So without taking them on board, it is very, very difficult to do a effective response, particularly. And unlock the potential of regional cooperation, recovery, strengthen the capacity building and use of ICT in disaster recovery. This is very, very important, capacity building, capitalize on new technologies, and chapter 6, ICT, gender and disaster risk reduction, incorporate gender sensitive practices, make collection and analysis of sex disaggregated data mandatory, so that you know that in a particular location how much female or women are there, and according to your policy, when you are taking risk reduction measures, you can address those. Promote ICT and ICT-enabled services for women's empowerment, which is very key for effective risk management. Thank you very much. I will end here. And I will hand over the screen to Professor Case. Then just 1 moment. Okay. Yeah. So I'll invite Professor Case for. I have to. Yeah. Okay. Professor Case, now floor is yours, and please.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mansoor. Thank you, Mr. Ko, for initiating this and inviting us to be co-authors of this guide. I'd like to thank at least my co-authors Mansoor, Hasarika, and also Siams Nasrullah from Asian Institute of Technology, Geoinformatics Center, and of course the colleagues from APC-ICT that made this possible. Let me share my screen. I would like to follow up on the presentation by Mansoor to explain you a little bit more about the academic module on ICT for disaster risk management by going a bit more in detail on the content of the different chapters. As you can imagine, say this is a difficult task actually to do, because we have, the task to come up with a guide guide for policymakers on the use of ICT for disaster risk management that should be possible to give within about 2.5 days of training. And so this, of course, limits our possibilities on what we could actually show. Eventually, it resulted into a document of about 138 pages, where we are trying to highlight the key important aspects. So we try to give an overview of the field that's relevant, and on the other side, the potential of ICT within the field of disaster risk management. And very important within our within the guide will be the use of examples. So we're trying to give as many examples as we can to illustrate the potential of ICT, linking to many different initiatives in terms of websites, but behind the websites are always initiatives that relate to the different aspects of disaster risk management. We try to use as many recent examples as we can, but obviously these recent examples within 1 year will become already old. So continuous updating might also be relevant. And of course, these are not exhaustive. We also highlight a number of case studies, so a little bit more information on those specific examples that could also be used within the class environment to explain more and look into that with the group in more detail. There are also simple exercises within the module. We decided not to do any hands-on exercise given the short duration of the course, but they are, well, at least not with software that should be installed, but it's through tools that are readily available on internet and can be consulted. And of course, we have the policy considerations. So as Mansoor said, we divided the course into a number of chapters, where we first look at what kind of what is disaster risk management and how ICT can play a role. Then looking at what kind of data do we actually need for this. Must say we do focus in the ICT field, which is very wide, a bit more on the geospatial side, although we do also discuss communication. But say the major focus is on how do we get how the information is obtained that allows you to take decisions. The risk assessment and visualization part is also key, as it is the establishing the bottom line for making decisions later. And these decisions are on mitigation and prevention, but also on disaster preparedness, establishing of early warning, preparedness protocols, also running scenarios for disaster response and relief, but then also looking specifically at the actions required after disasters happen, focusing on damage assessments, for example. Disaster recovery, where also risk, again, plays an important role in order to be able to build back better. And it ends, as Mansoor said, with the gender and disaster risk reduction chapter. So the first chapter, Introduction to DRR, we start very basic. What is a disaster? What it is not? What it is a disaster to people at different levels. So also looking at different levels of community level or district level, country level. We're looking at disaster trends and also trying to explain reasons for these trends in disasters. Then we focus on disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management. We introduce major frameworks such as the Sendai framework. We look at disaster cycle and where ITC plays a major role. And we look at some of the main DRM workflows and give many examples. So one example is, okay, when we are discussing about disaster cycle, this is one of the illustrations we are using to say, okay, what different phases do we have and how do you subdivide those phases, and in which of the phases ICT would play a major role and a little bit minor role, and discuss that with the audience. We focus also on DRM workflows, so looking at who are the stakeholders in the process, what's the legal framework, what's the risk governance situation, how is risk communicated, and then what kind of decisions have to be taken in terms of planning alternatives or risk reduction alternatives, but also looking at possible future scenarios and how these influence, say the analysis needed for taking those decisions. So as elements at risk of vulnerability or risk assessment, risk evaluation, comparing alternatives, and then taking the decisions. During the course, there will be also a number of discussion sessions. Here, a simple example of a discussion on what a disaster is in relation to the definition that we're using, and also examples of using existing resources to find information for one specific country. For example, Global Assessment of Risk Atlas to find out about your country. The second chapter deals a lot with the data requirements, and there we are focusing on the major types of data that could be utilized, focusing a lot on remote sensing data, as there's a wealth of remote sensing products available for many different disaster risk management applications. Digital elevation data, which is very often relevant for many applications. All different types of thematic data, also focusing on collecting data at the local level, for example, voluntary mapping. We focus on things like OpenStreetMap, voluntary approaches. Also within the collection of historical hazard and disaster data, on treating on things like DESinventar, these initiatives, and what kind of where can we find hazard and risk data on the internet? And it's also about spatial data infrastructure. So all these components are treated within that chapter with many examples of websites where data can be obtained, and also points for this further discussion also on the limitations, as that there is always a problem also with data scarcity and uncertainty within the data, and how to deal with that in a decision-making context. So here also example discussion and exercises are done evaluating remote sensing data needs, for example, what kind of remote sensing would you need for which purpose? The next chapter deals with the risk assessment. So we're looking at understanding disaster risk and risk management. We get the framework of what risk actually is, and look also at different approaches that could be used to analyze the risk. So we're looking at, say, things like probabilistic approaches, quantitative deterministic methods, up to very qualitative methods where we're using kind of simple combinations of weighted approaches. And also explain in which of these situations it would be relevant to use these and what kind of information these approaches would give for decision making. We focus also on the tools for risk analysis. So looking at what's available for use online. So not focusing that much, not on the commercial applications, but much more on those applications that could be freely available to decision makers. Within the risk visualization part, we also focus on a number of examples where participants can visualize, use examples of risk visualization tools. For instance, using an example related to which I'm showing here, an example from a recent project that was done in Tajikistan, where people can query hazard maps, elements at risk exposure maps, loss maps, and where it's possible that decision makers generate their own risk profile for any specific combination of hazards and elements at risk, and so obtain the correct information required for their specific application. So the second chapter deals with mitigation and prevention, where we are introducing the stakeholders, their objectives and the scales, what is needed by different stakeholders, which information would they need. We also look at risk perception, so how different stakeholder groups perceive risk in a different way and how risk could be communicated between stakeholder groups, evaluated. We're looking at how risk reduction alternatives and possible future scenarios could be compared. Here's one example of, say, a very simple example of how, in the case of a flood risk, the existing situation could be compared with one example of a risk reduction situation, and that it could be done on the basis of very simple cost-benefit analysis. We also look at, say, what decision makers could do to analyze the present risk, but also how risk is likely to change in the future, and what kind of risk reduction measures they could implement, and then see what the effect is of those risk reduction measures under different future scenarios. In the chapter 5, we're looking at disaster preparedness, and so we go through a number of important steps related to like community-based preparedness planning, shelter planning, early warning systems, etc. And also, for example, look at one example of impact-based forecasting, so trying to predict the risk while the disaster is still evolving, for example, approaching tropical storms, and to decide where and how much the risk will be so that aid agencies can allocate resources appropriately. Chapter 6 deals with disaster response, and we're looking at many different components there, both involving participatory mapping, but also remote sensing based mapping, ICT for disaster communication, and we have a separate part on ICT to responding to COVID-19. Example of that here from GDEX, Global Disaster Alert and Coordination System, with all the background information that's available for approaching disaster events that are very important for decision makers. Finally, disaster recovery. We're looking at ICT for disaster recovery. What is recovery? What's resilience? We look at building damage assessment over time, recovery monitoring, and in our last chapter, we deal with ICT, gender, and disaster risk reduction, as Mansoul indicated. So overall, a fairly dense guide, of course, with a number of limitations as to the content. We hope in terms of modes of delivery, this could be done either online. Of course, now with COVID-19, everything is online, but we also, for example, are doing this seminar now with people from many different time zones. And I think online is also the potential for the future. We could do this online with recorded video lectures, etc., but also give workshops with 2.5 duration where we prepare the materials beforehand. So that was all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Chris, for explaining all details of the content of the module. We are almost, we're initially running a little late, but I think we are now only 1 minute late, so you covered well. Thank you so much. So now I would like to introduce our panelists. First is Mr. Kamal Kishore. He is a member of National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India. He worked in disaster risk reduction and recovery for the last 22 years. And also he worked mostly in UNDP in Delhi, Geneva, and New York for 13 years before joining as a member of NDMA. And he also currently co-chair of GFDR for the second consecutive year. Then I'd like to introduce Francis Gaskaya. He's a practice manager in World Bank, currently based in Singapore. And before that, he was the head of Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction, GFDR, in Washington. And I know Francis by a CAPRA, which is very well-known software he promoted when we were, he tried to bring risk assessment, I would say 10 or 15 years ago, using this CAPRA, which was developed in South America, and he mainstream it in the disaster risk reduction community. So, and that's how he also pioneered in introducing a forum called Understanding Risk Forum, in which happen every 2 years, starting from I think 2012. And this year it was supposed to be in Singapore, but it has been postponed, and now it looked like that we will have online only somewhere in November. So, he has been wide experience globally, Asia, South America, and many other countries. And I think he's one of the best informed person in risk assessment or disaster risk management as of today. And our next speaker will be Sarah Wade Apesela, Program Management Officer, Office of the Northeast Asia Global Education and Training Institute, JT, in UNDRR. And she coordinates the UNDRR office in Incheon, Korea, where she currently developing training program for national implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, with focus with climate change convention and SDGs. She was also managing editor of Prevention Web and even the UNISDR, Disaster Risk Reduction Community Knowledge Service platform from 2007 to 2015. then our final speaker is Dr. Sanjay Srivastava. He's the Chief of Disaster Risk Reduction, ICT and Division in UNISDR here in Bangkok. He has a PhD in applied physics, and he was, before joining the Chief as DRR here in ESCAP, he was a regional advisor from 2019 to 2014, and head of, also prior to that, head of SARC Disaster Management Center in New Delhi from 2007 to 2008. And he originally come from ISRO, that is the famous Indian Space Research Organization, and he has a very in-depth knowledge and interest in remote sensing, and he has been contributing a lot in this area when he is in UNESCAP. So with this introduction, I will invite my friend Kamal Kishore to deliver his speech. Over to you, Kamal Kishore.
Thank you very much, Manzur. And I would like to first of all congratulate ESCAP and its partners for launching this partnership and launching this program. I think it's very timely and very useful. The world has changed very significantly in the last decade and a half. In this respect, you know, when you look at the entire disaster risk management spectrum, you know, when 2001 earthquake happened in Gujarat, it took about an hour and a half to confirm the location and magnitude of the earthquake. Today, anywhere in South Asia, an expanded region, I get an alert within 3 minutes if there's an earthquake, magnitude, depth, location, and that's verified. And if you subscribe to USGS services, basically anywhere in the world, you know, you will be bombarded with a lot of information. Likewise, on the response side, if you look at cyclone response, we know exactly what information has to reach what people, and that's really beginning to happen. You know, we can actually see almost in real time a landslide folding wherever we have installed sensors. We can keep track of how a flash flood situation is developing, you know, how risk of glacial lake outburst flood is happening. So tremendous progress has been made in the last 15 years or so, and it, you know, using the ICTs is becoming really a second nature to that. Having said that, that is the good news. The not so good news is that in my assessment, we are barely making 5% of the potential that is out there. So what I will do in the limited time we have is really identify 5 big barriers to making the most of ICTs. The first barrier in my assessment is that we do not have, from the client side or from the disaster risk management side, we often do not have a very sharp problem definition. As a result, you have a lot of ICT solutions that are looking for problems. So, you know, for example, if you're living in a cyclone-prone area, what is the specific problem? Not in a general way that we need to convey an early warning system. The specific problem is that once we know where the landfall is likely to occur, how do we identify a cone or, you know, a geography where the winds will be of what speed and who needs to be informed. So that's a specific problem. How do we reach there? So I think, so that's just one example where I think we are doing better than other aspects of disaster risk management. I think sharper problem definition before we get on the bandwagon of developing apps, developing, you know, different kinds of solutions, which are not really, sometimes you see that there are very exciting things, but they are not really addressing a problem that people are looking to solve. And that is not something which I will put in the court of ICT managers. I will put it in the court of the disaster risk managers, that we are not sharply defining the problems to which we need solutions. The second thing is more in the government realm, where I think that the development in ICTs is so rapid that the regulatory environment is barely able to catch up with it. the drones are already there, and then we were saying, so what should be our drone policy for disaster risk management? Most countries, I will tell you, do not have a policy on in the civil aviation or whoever in defense, how drones will be managed, who's allowed to do it, how the licensing happens. I'm not calling for over-regulating something. We have to create an enabling environment, but we can also not have a chaos prevailing. So I think we really need to have a system by which the regulation development mechanism, the mechanism of developing standards, keeps pace with the way the development is happening in ICTs. I think we are lagging behind significantly. The third point I have is that for making the most of the technology, there has to be a lot of work on interoperability of systems. There has to be better integration of different kinds of technologies. There is the hard, tedious work of data management protocols, hard, tedious works of how different systems interact with that. I think we get excited about new developments, but do not invest enough in the really good data hygiene, good hygiene in terms of systems management, etc., having the right sorts of capacities there to actually do that. So the hard, tedious enabling work, which basically gives you a platform on which you can build. So I think focus on not just the attractive cutting edge stuff, but also focus on hard, tedious stuff of getting the basics right in terms of systems and procedures. So that's my third point. My fourth point is that there are relatively few platforms and understanding risk, which Francis championed, not just championed, he basically initiated it, is one of the few ones where there is a good interaction between producers and users of technology and solutions. Even when we have, hackathons and all of that, usually you see that the band of people we have in the room is actually quite narrow. And when I talk about stakeholders, I'm not just talking about stakeholders in the national disaster management authorities. I'm talking about communities themselves as well. We haven't been able to foster a thriving dialogue between the producers of solutions and potential users of solutions. There are very few examples, and I mentioned understanding risk. There are a few others as well, but I think we need to do a lot more, and really that needs to be taken down to the local level. Francis was talking about taking understanding risk global to understanding risk regional, national. I would say that take understanding risk local. Let's do understanding risk Odisha, for example, and see how that connection can happen. We really take that dialogue to the local level. And my fifth and final point is that there's a lot of duplication happening. I mean, just in the context of COVID-19, I think there are close to 100 applications that have been developed just in India. And I'm sure if you look at the globe, for COVID-19, for geofencing, for risk assessment at the individual level, for managing the hospital beds, managing supply. There's so many applications, but there isn't one platform where we can see what others have done. Can we just quickly take their stuff and duplicate it? So I think we really have to treat these solutions as global goods rather than just focus on our own thing and make these available in open source platforms as much as possible. So in that context, the training program that ESCAP has developed is really a global good. So, I mean, we should really appreciate that and look forward to working with ESCAP colleagues and seeing how we can benefit from it here in India. Thank you very much. And I look forward to engaging in the discussion during the course of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal, for your insights. I'll go to Francis. So over to Francis, you.
Thank you, Mansoor, and thank you, Mr. Ko, for having me. And let me start like Kamal by congratulating ESCAP for organizing this program. I think it's quite commendable, and I must say it's also a pleasure to be here with some old friends, Kees and Mansoul and Kamal. They will deny it vehemently, but I think they can be considered among the founding father of modern DRM. So to the participants or people who would participate in this training program, you're in good hands. These are a very strong team. I've been asked to say a few words about ICT for DRM at the World Bank. Let me start by saying that ICT is the right place to be in DRM. It's a real interesting area of work. ICT has really helped develop disaster risk management and made it much more important over the years. It's also a field that is still evolving, where there's a lot of things still to be discovered and used. If we look at the experience of the World Bank, of course, we've used a lot of ICT in our DRM program, but if you look at the program on disaster risk management, on climate adaptation, and similar program 20 years ago, these programs were fairly small, fairly specialized, whereas today the World Bank is probably the largest funder of DRM and climate adaptation in the world. The program, depending on how you count, is between $5 and $10 billion a year. And I would personally attribute a lot of this to the advent of computer power, of risk modeling, of satellite imagery, social media, all these ICT tools that have helped us bring to the fore the issue of resilience. We now talk more about resilience than disaster risk management. And in fact, DRM is not just one sector anymore. It's in everything that we do. It is part of the program in infrastructure, of course, but also agriculture, education, health, social sector, microeconomic management, finances, etc. Each one of these global practice at the World Bank have their own team using ICT technology to increase resilience in those sectors. And surprisingly, I would say that ICT is important for this transformation, not so much because it brings technologies and augment the capacity to do things, but mostly because it has increased our capacity to analyze and understand the risk, but also to communicate about risk, right? We can now go to a civil protection agency and work with them to visualize risk. What could happen? Where would it happen? How do we pre-position assets to be able to respond? How would we target messages to particular audiences and communities? We can work with the Ministry of Planning to compare different risks, something that was very difficult to do in the past. How would you compare the risk of cyclone and earthquake if you're Haiti and you're exposed to both? And how do you prioritize intervention? But more, and in this, very importantly, is the capacity to talk to decision maker in their own language. We can visualize risk, but we can now talk about risk in terms of dollar cents when we talk to ministries of finance, for example. How much is your probability of loss? And how does this compare with other risk to your balance sheet, right? There's a risk, the Ministry of Finance, they hedge their risk against devaluation of their currency or a commodity shock. Well, they can now compare those risks in dollar sense with the risk of impact of cyclone, the risk of impact of earthquake. And this has only been possible thanks to technique that ICT has enabled. And as I said, ICT for DRM is still evolving. I think there's now more imagery, more data than we could even have dreamed of 10 years ago. We have satellite going up every day. We now have cloud computing, we have artificial intelligence, we have 5G. My sense is it's going to continue to evolve. And if I have one message, it is that if you embrace, if you become an expert in ICT for DRM, keep asking questions, keep pushing the envelope and develop new application, new ideas. Don't just use what already exists. So, and another message is don't limit yourself to one application. I've talked a little bit now about risk modeling and how it helps us visualize risk and how it helps us analyze risk in dollar sense, but ICT can be used for many, and is being now used for many things: visualizing risk, for territorial planning, for risk reduction intervention, for emergency response, for early warning system, for risk transfer and insurance. The sky is the limit. Now, and in fact, I would, like Kamal said, I would encourage you to join communities like the Understanding Risk communities, because it's only by looking at what other people in completely different sectors, people who maybe don't even talk about risk from a natural disaster, looking at what they're doing, that you can learn and then apply them to your own sector, and then this cross-fertilization idea bring innovation and new ideas. You can just join the UR community by typing Understanding Risk or UR 2020 on your on Google, and you will get there. I know that Kamal Case and Mansoul are a member, like, I think there's now probably close to 10,000 practitioners, experts, and others who are part of it. But let me end with a few words of caution, right? And the first one is a point that Kamal already alluded on, which is that it's important to remain focused on solving problem and not trying to have a technology that looks for a problem. We're trying to serve particular community, we're trying to solve a risk problem, and then we should look for the technology that is more appropriate for this problem. And around the world, we see too many people who have a new technology and then they're looking for a problem. And personally, I have never seen an initiative that works with people having a technology trying to apply it to a problem. It works the other way around. The second word of caution I have, and this is even more important, is don't be seduced by gizmos and apps and beautiful maps. Risk modeling and geospatial representation are fascinating tools, but they're not and will never be the reality, right? Always keep that in mind. A lovely map, as attractive as it can be, is not reality. A beautiful model, as seducing as it can be, will never tell you exactly what will happen. In fact, it will tell you exactly what will not happen. It's one scenario. In general, the scenario you've planned for is not going to happen. So it's just information. Models rely on assumption. They have inexact and incomplete information. They have inherent bias. And you need to keep this in mind. You need to remain humble when using some of these tools for practical and real problem. At the end, we try to help real people, and we don't want to use, we want to make sure that we use, we're as exact as possible, and we're as modest as possible in not pretending we solve all the problem. And part of this is that at the end of the day, it doesn't dispense us from putting on our boots, going on the ground, talking to people, looking with our own eyes, what is the situation. Very often people can believe that with a few satellite imagery, they've solved a problem, and they haven't been on the ground to see that the satellite imagery wasn't showing everything, or is obsolete, or is not really giving you the information that you actually needed. So let me congratulate ESCAP again for promoting this program. All of you, if you are going to participate, to encourage you to join. And with this, wish you all the best for your future endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis, for your great experience. And you were, as I said, risk assessment you started a long time, and I'm very happy to hear your experience. Thank you for that. So I'll go to Sarah. Sarah, over to you. And time, if you can squeeze 1 minute or 2 minutes will be good. Thank you, if you can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mansoul. Thank you, Mr. Ko, and all of the colleagues at UNISDR, APC-ICT for this important launch. As many of you know, at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, we bring together governments, partners, and communities to reduce disaster risk and losses for a safer, sustainable future. And of course, that must and does include engaging the science and technology community, but including and very importantly, youth scientists and innovators. And I really want to already appreciate this message from Francis to remain humble, and also from he and Kamal to really question and not also be seduced by all the technologies. I have been asked to speak a bit about some of the gaps and challenges in using the technology for disaster risk reduction. I'll speak a bit from a policy perspective. And I think we have all witnessed how technology has already helped us to better monitor, test, trace, track, and treat COVID-19, including working and studying from home, connecting us in times of social distancing. But we also see that technology has enabled dissemination of the preparedness information, kept supply chains and businesses operating through use of social media, big data, blockchain, all along an internet backbone that I think we can now say is really a kind of critical infrastructure. So thank you. Next slide, please. So I first just wanted to share a message on the general picture of risk. And you may note that this quote from UN Secretary General Guterres is dated January 2019. So of course, this is before COVID, which came to us at the end of the year and really became pandemic in this year. And he said that it really highlighted that we have growing risk in a shrinking world. And he said global challenges are more and more integrated and responses more and more fragmented. If not reversed, it's a recipe for disaster. So already before COVID, of course, we were experiencing more frequent and intense hazard events, climate change, environmental degradation, globalized economic development, poverty and inequality, poorly planned urban development, and weak governance, all of these really driving risk. And we've already seen the figures from World Bank saying that COVID-19 is now likely to cause the first increase in global poverty since 1998. So indeed, I think as it has become the mantra these days, we should not go back to business as usual, and we should build back better. And I think technology is a huge part of that, but we must bear in mind all of the messages we've already heard from Francis and Kamal. Next, please. In order to address such challenges, we must really move towards understanding systemic risk and towards systemic risk governance. So from our office at UNDRR, we've really been looking at the weak governance link. And of course, technology is a key enabler to improving governance and decision making based on being risk informed. So then this links back to understanding risk, as Francis pointed out. Next slide, please. So on this screen, you actually see a fictional coastal delta city. And I think one of the participants asked a question about coastal cities ahead of the webinar. But so this is a fictional city that takes a systems approach to managing risk, but it is selective, even if appearing futuristic. It's based on careful expert thought and has been a kind of exercise in the imagination of the future we want. So if we think about the future we want and we ask those good questions, design the right briefs and look for the right technology, we can support such things as you see here: robust multi-hazard early warning systems, flood-proof water supply systems, recycled water, resilient supply chains, solar and hydro energy, green infrastructure. All of these are really enabled by technology. Next slide. So what are the opportunities and challenges? There certainly also still remains a digital divide, and I think many of the questions we received are looking at kind of how to best use ICT, maybe emergent technologies, but I think we cannot forget the importance of the local knowledge and also the importance of having kind of boots on the ground and adapting. So we do often hear about the lack of access, knowledge, or capacity on how to use existing technologies. So it's not necessarily that a new technology is needed, but also capacity for how to use. Or even when the capacity exists, there is often a lack of agreements and standards for the collaboration, for data sharing, including and especially across government ministries. So there is an urgent need to protect development gains and ensure these future risk investments are risk informed. So prioritizing both natural and human-induced hazard risk as areas of study for innovation and intervention are all part of risk management and all part of developing and using existing and appropriate technologies. Next slide. So for those of you that may not be familiar with the Sendai framework online, The Sendai framework, it was developed by member states for member states, and it is a roadmap on how to make communities safer and more resilient to disasters. We're already 5 years into it, with the first of its global targets actually arriving this year. It proposes 4 priorities for action, the 7 global targets, and for all of which science and technology must be enablers or they cannot be achieved. Next slide, please. So in particular, I draw your attention to priority 1 on understanding disaster risk, which really outlines the need for real-time access to reliable data, making use of space and in situ information, using GIS, the information and communication technology innovations, and in particular to enhance measurement tools, collection, analysis, and dissemination of data. So the framework itself can give some guidance in these areas, and of course is addressed in the APC-ICT DRM module. Next. The Sendai framework also outlines the role of technology, in particular through means of implementation, and in particular, expanding and strengthening global technology pools and systems to share know-how, innovation, and research. So including, for example, understanding risk community that Kamal has spoken about and that Francis has pioneered. Among those opportunities with the UNDRR led are enabling and creating partnerships with science and technology advisory groups, working on the global risk assessment framework, bringing together academia, science, and private sector. Also, as I have already mentioned, working through the youth scientist groups, private sector through the ARISE network, and also connecting and sharing information through the disaster risk reduction community platform of Prevention Web. Next. So the Global Assessment Report 2019 does outline a number of opportunities and enablers regarding data and technology. So I won't go into the details, but you have the hazard knowledge, open data, open source software, interoperability, and data science. So all of these really enabling the use of technology to understand risk, to be able to make risk-informed decisions, and to try to better understand what are your options for reducing risk and increasing resilience. Next slide, please. So I had also been asked to share briefly a couple of examples from Korea, and this comes from what I think it was already mentioned, the over 100 applications or so, maybe already in India. I think MIT was also recently reporting just on the number of COVID tracking apps. But here in the Republic of Korea, where I'm based, we have an everyday preparedness, risk identification, and citizen reporting app. So I think probably not enough citizens know about it, but it's quite amazing because this app actually allows, as I said, citizen participation. When you see risk, you can report it, you can upload with photos and reports of incidents, and you can track what is happening. So this is kind of everyday and ongoing. And on the right side, you see the real-time alerts and safety guidance. Just yesterday, we had a typhoon coming in addition to the COVID, increase in COVID. So we were receiving alerts on both, including that really critical information on what to do if the typhoon is coming, it disrupts service for COVID, for example. Next. And also here in Korea, I think many of you may have read, and I'll encourage you to look into it more, the Korean New Deal, which is based on digital infrastructure. Next. Also addressing the needs of the most vulnerable and ensuring that no one is left behind. Strengthening digitization to enhance inclusion efforts are ongoing. Digital solutions including cash transfers and digital connectivity to reach people in remote places. Next. So here I just want to outline a couple of the opportunities. Obviously, technology is an enabler to improve data science, risk assessment, and risk modeling that ultimately needs to inform planning and action by all. So this really requires what I think is lacking and has been highlighted is this interdisciplinary, cross-cultural, cross-boundary work and creating the right regulatory environment. so that ultimately as well to achieve SDGs, right? We leave no one offline. We use ICT as an accelerator and we put people first. So I think I'll leave it at that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah. Very nice explanation. So I'll go to Dr. Sanjay Srivastava. Sanjay Srivastava, floor is yours. If you can, please squeeze by 1 or 2 minutes. Dr. Srivastava, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello,
Yeah.
hello colleagues. Can you just put on my slides? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just making some specific observations from 2 angles. One is ESCAP analytical work on which is very pertinent to this module. The second is the demand side from the member country in the region. So my first slide pertains to the next slide, please. The next slide pertains to the key questions. I'm very happy our colleagues put some key questions, and that is what is those problems are and how this DRM ICT can solve. The first question is how the trends. So the next slide, let me tell you the trend. The trend is we have done this analysis in Asia Pacific Disaster Report on the use of ICT, the 2 areas where ICT use have been seen, tracked in Asia Pacific regions. One is from the data lens, and when you see the data which are put to use for a variety of disaster related applications, the trend is the data from satellite imagery, crowdsourcing, social media are on the rise. So more and more increase in application of these imagery, crowdsourcing are seen. My next slide is to show one is the next. One is data, the second is the new tools and technology which has made huge impact. This presentation is based on the experiences of ESCAP WMO panel on typhoon committee experience. So this is one experience where data works like a petroleum, technology used like a value. So this dual engine of high power computing infrastructure, this is numerical weather predictions and the artificial intelligence of big data together. This is what brings a lot of value for multi-hazard early warning system. And my next slide, if you saw, the next one, this is the examples from China presented to ESCAP WMO Typhoon Committee. Use of the data and this new technology, you see how it has brought down the mortality from one of the densely populated eastern part of China region that also includes Hong Kong, China, and also economic impact. So the value of data technology, particularly in case of a extreme event like typhoon, shows a very substantive impact in terms of reducing mortality and also bringing down the economic impact. The next slide, please. The next question was asked to me about mainstreaming digital technology in DRM policies. So the next slide is again, it highlights, I don't want to detail, it is data analytics infrastructure. In very few cases, in very few countries, there is a perfect symphony between data analytics and infrastructure. My next slide please. The next slide is 2 key questions which I were asked to represent. Because of lack of time, I may not able to explain, but my next slide, can you show? Next slide. Those who are interested, okay, those who are interested, I have referred some of the publications which could able to answer those questions. But these are the publications where you find all the answers. But when you come to the next slide, please. Yeah, now this is where I want to spend few minutes of my time. What is the difference this technology can make in such a crisis situation what the whole world is experiencing today? If you come to the next slide, yes, what is here on ground? On ground, there is a COVID spread going on, 75,000 cases today in India. So COVID is picking up in many parts of the world and particularly in South Asia. At the same time, you have a cyclone, you have floods, you have many multiple disasters. So you see the two scenarios. This is a reality on ground, a real problem on ground. The problem on ground, a spread of the COVID, and then disaster, the natural disasters. So there is an intersection of the biological hazards and natural disaster. These intersections were very clearly seen. If you see the right side diagram, when cyclone Amphan hit, it hit to those regions where COVID spread was taking place. So with this kind of collision of climate and COVID, what is the solution, where the solution lies, how country can manage two different kind of disaster which has an almost opposite risk profile. So my next slide will show the solution part which comes from technology, and particularly ICT is one part of it. There are three scenarios which exist today on ground. One is the scenario of the floods. I have just given examples of South Asia and flood and vulnerable people on ground. Our disaster managers are quite well aware in terms of managing this scenario. The scenario 2 is a cascading risk, flood affected, confronting COVID. This is a scenario 2 which becomes a very complex scenario. And scenario 3 is flood, vulnerable people, COVID, and then vector and waterborne diseases together. So it's a additional morbidity which adds a lot of risk complexity to solve on the ground. What is the solution? Can ICT or can any new technological tools address such a complex crisis situation? My next slide. The next slide will show you need, this is what is the second generation early warning system we call, particularly in DRR community. You need a risk indexing, which is what is impact-based forecasting and risk-informed early warning system. This is targeted to the risk, not to the hazard. So in weather system, particularly for tropical cyclone, there is a well-established methodology on impact forecasting. This is the impact likelihood. Then you have a health COVID risk, cascading risk scenario, which has a very different kind of risk profile. Now, how can you bring two index together? So the demand for those who are exposed to the COVID is very different from those who are supposed to protect from the floods or tropical cyclone. So my next slide shows when you have a risk matrix of two disasters, you need a real AI system to bring this seamless integration of two risk profiles of health hazard and disasters together, and then locate those areas where there is a convergence of COVID and flood risk. And this is what is called impact-based and risk-informed early warning systems. And then you identify what are the health infrastructure in those areas where there are cascading risks. You have floods, you have COVID, and you have water and vector-borne diseases together. So for three scenarios, you see how many hospitals, infrastructures are there, what are the social norms, the social distancing, physical distancing can be possible. So we brought out on a map those areas experiencing cascading risk. So the reality on the ground is there are complex cascading risks. Country needs solution to address. You use all your analytics, whether it is AI or all the state-of-the-art technology. The solution lies in building a second generation early warning system, which has to be not only impact forecasting, but risk informed, risk for COVID, a different kind of early warning system, risk for floods, different warning system, and other health related early warning system. So when you bring all risk informed early warning system, you are in a better situation to resolve this kind of crisis on the ground. My next slide is the standard operating process which are available today are for floods separate, cyclone separate. Many times it brought together flood and cyclone. But in a standard operating process, there is nothing of biological disaster like COVID. So this standard operating process needs to be revised. You need a high quality early warning, maybe 10-15 days of flood or cyclone forecasting, and to operate. This is an example for Bangladesh, where the medium range weather forecast data were used to update the standard operating process and to include two hazards on the ground together. The next slide is The next slide is from ESCAP side. Those who are interested, we have brought out 3 reports, how a country can manage the cascading risk. And with the risk matrix approach, impact forecasting, what we call risk-informed impact forecasting strategy. These are all technology intensive, but the problems on the ground where there are convergence of multiple risks demand such technological observations. I'm very happy that this module has some solution to address cascading risk, and in days to come, it will be very popular among the member country. I think this was my last slide. Yes, I think I'm thankful to my colleagues in ESCAP who helped me to prepare this presentation. I have some young interns, have just listed their names. So thank you very much for the opportunities. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Srivastava. Excellent presentation. So only problem is time. Dr. Ko, Mr. Ko. So we have only 5 minutes left, but let me see if we can extend by 5 minutes. I don't know. But so there are a lot of questions. I think we have got around 35 questions before the in advance, and now around 10-15 questions. So I'll take very few. First, I'll take for Kamal. Kamal, this is I think from India. It says, what is the present status of common alerting protocol in India? Many agencies are working different aspects of early warning, but still facing challenges to disseminate the information to common people. So CAP regulation has not come into force, so that is a problem. So what is your view on this?
Thank you, Manzul, for a very good question, very relevant, pertinent question. So it's a priority right now for us. And right now, 2 states in the country are piloting CAP. And within a year, we hope to be able to roll out to the rest of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal. So I'll take another question for Francis. It is, what technologies are suitable for monitoring and risk minimization for multi-hazards, especially low and middle income countries? What challenges here is a slow, unresponsive government and unwillingness of people to at risk to move out to safe zones. So a little bit, yeah, I mean, basic, yeah. You got the question?
I get the question, and to be exact, you want me to answer in 23 seconds, right?
Up to you.
Okay, but then all I can say, Mansoul, is that, and I tried to allude on this in my presentation, is that you now have much more sources of information than was available in the past. And in fact, a lot of them allows us to find information remotely. I think the lack of information in developing countries is one of the main issues, but there are now lots of tools that can be used, from satellite, drones, but also, and we should not underestimate the power of using social media. Social media contacting people directly. Now, a lot of people, even in developing countries, have a cell phone and will answer a question, but also a lot of people are on social media, and a lot of the postings are public. And one example is during the war in Syria, the bank, we of course couldn't go to assess the impact of the conflict on particular cities, but we had to prepare intervention for when cities would open up for reconstruction. And so we worked but simply filtering all the posting on social media, and you would be amazed how much information you can gather from some of these sources. So my main message is, by being creative, you can do a lot. And in fact, in recent years, I've been amazed at how some teams have been able to collect absolutely and build magnificent application with very little initial information base.
Thank you, Francis. Sarah, I'll direct a question for you. How can ICTs help in mitigate and save casualties from natural disaster like earthquake, landslide, flood, fire, etc. in remote areas for for television broadcasting, but I think including other media available, not only other ICT tools. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Well, saving lives requires that people have an understanding of the risks they face and the preparedness planning and capacity development to know what to do, where to go in the event of a disaster. So, of course, we all know that early warning system saves lives and must actually reach the last mile. We still must reach farther. And some of the technologies, including the use of social media that Francis just referenced, can be also helpful. Information and public awareness campaigns, education programs in communities and schools are also important and should be prioritized. Community leaders and community members should be involved directly, not as recipients, but in the design of plans, conduct of simulation exercises, and communicating such plans. And of course, the ICT opportunities through cell phone broadcasts, telephone trees, and including the social media networks. And I would say very important is also the use of storytelling and having learning objectives. All of this can eventually contribute. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, one question for you. Time has come to integrate climate change adaptation and DRM with more focused effort from UN agencies. So just a short comment on this.
I have responded through my presentation. Of course,
Yeah, that's why I'm asking quick.
Yeah. The WMO and ESCAP, we have, of course, WMO has many collaboration with other UN agencies, but one area where we are collaborating with WMO seamlessly is this impact-based forecasting and risk-informed early warning system. The early warning system must be targeted to the risks. Risk of the persons, are very different from different person. COVID risks are different from the cyclone risk. So we need to develop such kind of innovative tools which can really enhance the capacity of the country. I remember a few years back when there was used to be a cyclone, the number of casualties used to be in thousands. Today, it has brought down in 1 digit or 2 digits. So that's the power of the technology. And we look forward same technology capacity to work for the future in a complex risk situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I will not take any more questions. I think I will read some comments quickly, what's coming in the feeding. Few comments. One is that most of the solutions are suggested from top bottom rather than bottom to top. I agree with Dr. Kamal Kishore. Another one is, this is very informational and knowledgeable speech. I don't know whom he's talking, or somebody else, only one person that I don't know. Forwarding is the essential, forwarding is essential need for the community rather than beautiful maps after the disaster. Well said. There is a substantial time gap in getting real-time data information, which is a real problem experienced today. Deep thinking is required on this. I think they're all well said. I think we'll try to address. Thank you very much, all the speakers, resource person, and I'll hand over to Mr. Ko.
Thank you, Dr. Manzul. Thank you. And we always lack of time for Q&A, as always. And if you can send us the email, and I will keep this participant or speakers in the room and try to get the answers to your question as much as possible. Again, Dr. Manzur, thank you for your excellent moderation. Professor Weston for your overview, nice overview of the module, and speakers, very wonderful, points and insights. Your many good points will be captured in our future updates in our module. And I need to say this, I'd like to thank the colleagues in the UNDRR and our ESCAP, Sanjay. Without your help, we couldn't, we would not have completed our module. Thank you very much for taking this chance. And those who participated in this webinar, thank you very much, and hope this was very helpful for you. Now, I'd like to mention is that now we're ready to roll out our training, the module virtually this year. And if situation gets better, face-to-face next year. And we'll start with a regional workshop and followed by national ones. Professor Weston mentioned that 2.5 working workshop, base for workshop, because we found it's difficult to keep senior officers in the same place for 2 to 3 days. But if it gets to guest a junior level or other different audience, it can be extended. We can even include the hands-on experience. And we are ready to customize to fit our audience the context. And we are open to cooperate with you for workshops and joint projects, including customization. So we work closely with the governments, agencies, academia, public and private institutes. So please do contact us if you are interested to work with us. And then now please take a moment to give us your feedback so that we can improve better. Okay, and then can I ask the speakers to
Video on
their camera?
Yeah.
To say bye to our participants, and thank you very much, and I will keep in touch with you for future developments and workshops. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Stay safe.
Thanks a
Stay
lot.
safe. That's important. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
colleague.
See you soon. See you soon.
See you soon.